It's been 2 years since the war in Sudan erupted between the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, as they're commonly known, and the Sudanese Armed Forces. 2 years of relentless violence, ethnic cleansing, sexual violence, extrajudicial killings, and an ever worsening humanitarian catastrophe. And as the world marks this grim anniversary, there's a high level conference that is set to take place in London, co-hosted by the UK, the EU, France, and Germany, and it'll be focused on this. It'll be focused on Sudan. But the burning question remains: will global leaders finally move beyond statements to take decisive action that can protect civilians and hold perpetrators accountable? And the African Union, what role, have they been playing in this? Have they been, active, and have shown strength when it comes to, I think, one of the world's largest humanitarian crisis that is not spoken about enough, that is not documented enough. It's like it's happening on another planet, and for us South Africans particularly, I don't see us taking a keen interest on this when it's happening right on our doorstep. It's happening here on the continent of Africa, and I feel we should be more conscious of it. We should be participating in making sure that there's a solution that is being found. And we're going to try and do all of that. We're going to be unpacking, I think, this. I think a humanitarian nightmare, if I can put it that way, one of the world's worst that has ever been seen. And I will be joined by Mr. Deprose Muchena, Senior Director for Regional Human Rights Impact at Amnesty International, to help us unpack what's really at stake and what the international community must do to halt the suffering of millions in Sudan. And he's joining us via our virtual platform. Mr. Muchena, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time this morning, and looking forward to an insightful, eye-opening, educational conversation on, I think, the unfortunate, disaster that we see unfolding in Sudan.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And one of the bigger challenges when discussing Sudan is what I call its identity as a world forgotten crisis. It's a crisis that has taken place now 2 years in a row. Yesterday, we marked 2 years full when the conflict began in Khartoum, when two sides of a military establishment that was created by President Omar Bashir clashed around power sharing arrangements. The consequence of that clash has been 2 years down the line, tens of thousands have been killed and even more injured. Over 11 million people have fled their homes, including 8.6 million people who are now internally displaced. We are talking of 3 million people who have become refugees in neighboring countries. And Sudan has become the largest displacement crisis in the world. The Rapid Support Forces and the Sudan Armed Forces continue to commit gross human rights violations, as well as international humanitarian law violations, as this war reigns supreme, largely powered by the culture of impunity, the supply of weapons, and now it's beginning to impact women and girls in forms we have not seen before. And the focus of our report is on this last subject, the impact of the war on women and girls as the Rapid Support Forces commit these violations.
And I want to jump in on exactly that. We are seeing reports of systematic abuses by both the RSF and the SAF. There've been reports of ethnic cleansing in Darfur, attacks on hospitals, torture in detention centers. What kind of evidence has Amnesty International been able to gather from the ground on the lived realities of the people of Sudan?
From the early days of this conflict, Amnesty International has been documenting that both sides of this conflict have repeatedly committed human rights violations, in particular international humanitarian law violations, and also committing war crimes. in the latest round of our reporting, not only has the Rapid Support Forces, which we zeroed our attention on, has committed war crimes, they also may have committed crimes against humanity, largely because of conflict-related sexual violence that we have zeroed in as we go 2 years of the war. The Rapid Support Forces have committed violations related to gang raping of women, rape, sexual slavery, organized torture, and these sexual slavery, sexual assaults, gang raping has been committed sometimes in front of family members, have been committed to women as young as 5 and as old as 80. It has been indiscriminate, creating the ultimate attack on women's bodies, the ability to humiliate them in front of their family. And as you know, in Sudan, rape is such a stigmatized phenomenon that what has happened is women who have been victims of this gang raping have suffered traumatic injuries, have suffered bodily harm, including kidney pain, inability to walk, memory losses, and all kinds of other social and psychological disorders. This is what women whom we interviewed advised us of their condition. They were not able to get immediate medical help because, as you know, medical supplies, humanitarian support is absent for most victims. And this adds to the situation of violation of human rights to victims of this war. And this is why it is important for accountability measures to start to be effected, as well as the world taking notice of this conflict and take steps to ensure that the RSF is held to account, it stops what it is doing, and that the Rapid Support Forces, the Sudan Armed Forces, as well stops committing the violations that they've been accused of up to this point.
Mm, mm. One of the calls by human rights organizations, I think, as you uttering, those disturbing findings, is for a civilian protection mission in Sudan. What would that look like in practice, in literal terms? That's the first question. Is it feasible? And has there been any precedent of such an intervention in recent history?
Broadly, we have called as Amnesty International for protection of civilians and of human rights defenders because they have no part in the war that is being fought. And we have also called for greater humanitarian support. So I'm sticking to the calls that Amnesty International has made. Let me tell you just one example of what it has meant when we say humanitarian support is absent. The call for humanitarian support is at the level of around 4.6 billion needed to provide supplies that enable the reversal of the indicators that I started with when we started your show. Out of that, only 6.6% of what is needed has been secured, which is basically 226 million. We need 4.6 billion. So that means without that level of support, the protection of civilians or human security is not guaranteed. Hunger, food insecurity, as well as malnutrition, collapse of education facilities, health facilities can continue to undermine and affect civilians in Sudan. The second is there are those who are documenting and monitoring what is happening to civilians. More often than not, they are the ones targeted by RSF from doing what they are doing and being subjected to violations every day. The third, specifically on protection of civilians, and the question that you ask, we have called for the enforcement of the arms embargo on Sudan, which currently exists only in Darfur. But because it has been undermined by warring parties, arms transfer, weapons transfer have continued to find their way into Darfur and into the rest of the country. Our
Mm.
report
I wanna,
recommends that.
sorry to jump in there. I wanna touch on that because I think you just encroached a bit on my next question. The allegations that countries like the United Arab Emirates have violated the arms embargo, as you mentioned, and have been funneling weapons, to the warring parties. How significant is the role of external actors in fueling this conflict, and what mechanisms exist to hold them accountable? I'm just asking that because we're quickly running out of time, and I think this is a very, very important point to touch on before you wrap up.
No, fantastic. That's a good question. I think we have argued that the war has been fueled by a constant supply of arms. In our August report, Amnesty International named companies, named countries that are involved, including the United Arab Emirates, which has been front and center supporting RSF. And this is why we have said, the UN Security Council's arms embargo must be extended to the rest of the Sudanese territory, not just Darfur. Because if you're just in Darfur, weapons are entering the country through different channels. So we need that to be implemented and enforced. That is the only way to ensure that civilians are protected. If you have a standby force or any other intervention in the presence of weapons transfer from companies in Turkey, Serbia, China, and UAE, and from countries that are actively supporting these warring parties, then the war will continue to be fueled. Accountability is what the women who have been violated have said. They want accountability. They want protection, that what happened to them doesn't happen again. And they are also asking for immediate medical support to deal with their bodily harm.
And just lastly, before I let you go, sticking with that theme, we've seen, I think, massive cuts to humanitarian aid, especially from the US under this new Trump administration. What kind of impact did that have? What kind of support do local responders and NGOs need right now to keep aid flowing to the people? I think we can all agree at this point are on a brink of dying from starvation.
Mm. I think what the US aid cuts have done is to simply exacerbate and make more drastic an existing dangerous situation. The health scare, I told you that the complete destruction of health institutions and facilities has meant that there is no treatment to people injured in the course of the war. The supply of food, supply of services, supply of amenities, supply of post-rep care case management is non-existent, because this war has devastated any infrastructure that you might have in a country to enable it to move forward. So the cuts by USAID simply come in to amplify a pre-existing crisis. That is why we have called for greater humanitarian support from the world, from the European Union, from the African Union, and frankly, the African Union itself and regional leaders bear the responsibility of decisively tackling this conflict by calling a spade a spade. This is an African crisis for where we expect greater African leadership before we can ask of others outside of the continent to act.
No, definitely. And I think we're going to leave on that note. Deprose Muchena, Senior Director at Amnesty International. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
There you go. I think a very, very insightful conversation. And as we wrap it up, man, let's remember that while our eyes, and rightly so, remain fixed on the tragedy unfolding in Gaza, we cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the horror that is in Gulf Sudan. I mean, 2 years of war, ethnic cleansing, mass starvations, children being buried in playgrounds. These are some of the findings and reports that organizations like Amnesty International have come out with. And what's crazy is these are not distant headlines. They are African realities happening right here on our own continent, on our own doorstep, as I mentioned. So I think it's not a question of either or. I think Palestine is the moral crisis of our time, but Sudan is the forgotten war of our generation. And if we say charity really does begin at home, then I think Sudan must be part of our collective outcry, our humanitarian response, and our media focus. Eh? We don't see Sudan on the news as much as I think we should, and that's a point of concern. You have Africans dying. Africans are starving. Africans are being silenced. And I think it's time we speak up for Sudan with the same urgency, same solidarity, and same moral clarity that we show for Palestine, because justice isn't justice unless it's for all that are oppressed. We're going to leave it on that note. News and views continues after this.